Meetings always sneak up on me. Like, wow, it's November already. Like,
Fast.
it seems like it should be, probably a week or so, and then there'll be a PUC meeting. Nope. Now, go.
When it's thrill a minute, you know.
Well, you'll be lucky. December won't sneak up on you quite as fast.
Why would that be?
Because I think there's 5 Wednesdays in November.
Oh,
Ooh.
5? Well, why do you still could hit the first one on December 2nd, right?
But it'll be 5 weeks instead of 4.
5 Wednesdays.
What a break.
Leap
Sure
Wednesday.
enough.
They happen how many times?
Yeah, it's not till the 6th of December.
We are live, by the way.
You're live, ready to go. All right. Welcome to PUC meeting, November 1st, 2023. Members present, Charles, Bill, myself, Mike Roth, Patrick Knight, and Shane is also present. First item on the agenda is the approve the consent agenda. The minutes from, any changes that you see in the minutes from the last meeting or the payments report. If anybody has any questions.
I don't.
I think the minutes.
I'll move approval of the agenda.
Okay, all right. Motion made to approve the consent agenda and seconded by Charles. Motion carries. The item on the agenda today is basically budget and rates for electricity. Is that, we're just talking about electricity
We're
today?
talking about electricity today.
Yeah. So I guess, I don't know, Mike, do you want to just
Let's do this.
put it out there? What do
We've
we
got 3 items in the packet to help with this conversation. The first is a 2-page memo that outlines the basics of the budget, expense revenue, and some history behind it, the different pieces that are included. The next is a chart that shows our relatively flat history of electricity sales over the past 18 years. And then the last is an actual detailed line item budget if we need to dig into any specific questions. I'm going to propose that we don't spend a lot of time on that unless you have specific questions. Let's look at the chart first, just to understand,
This chart?
yeah,
Yep.
what's going on with our electricity sales. First thing to note is it doesn't start at 0, so it actually, if we looked at this from 0 at the bottom rather than 10 million, it would actually look even a little bit flatter. And if you were to draw a regression line across this, it would probably show a very slight growth over those 18 years. Many of those 18 years, particularly the first, say, 10 of them, we predicted 0 load growth when we were doing our work with SIMPA about what to think about for predicted load next year. They thought 0 made sense, and so did we. Then you can see in maybe 12, 13, it starts to go up, and then it starts to come down again. What's going on? Who knows? We don't have a lot of growth in the city at that time in terms of new customers. There's a little bit, but not a lot. And there's also, at the same time, a lot of changes in the technology world about efficiency. And so I think they're kind of fighting each other. When we look at this same chart with water, you're going to see unequivocally shrinking sales over the past 30 years. Not close. The number goes down because efficiency's gone way, way, way up.
Water efficiency?
Water efficiency. With electricity, it's not as much. So I think there's those two things fighting against each other here. Our load demand is going up in terms of usage at the same time that efficiency is going up, and so our sales stay relatively flat. In 2020, you can see there was a big decrease. No surprise.
Why?
COVID.
Pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
There was a significant drop in activity, particularly commercial activity in the community.
Commercial, yeah.
And it didn't really recover in 2021, even though we were as busy as I can ever remember us being in 2021. The activity level commercially didn't recover from a utility sales perspective. But last year it did, to 2022 levels. You can see now they're back up to, again, if you were just imagining a regression line on this chart, they'd be pretty close to on it, 2022.
Back
And
up
where are
to-
we at on 2023? We're just a little bit behind 2022 in terms of sales amounts. So we're going to use that predictor, 2023, a little bit behind 2022, and imagine that 2024 is going to be exactly the same as 2023. Now, of course, it's not. None of these years ever turn out to be exactly the same as the one before them. But with this kind of history of relatively flat growth, I think that's the best way to do budgeting, is to think about a relatively flat growth in sales.
Does weather play into this, do you suppose?
Big time.
Yeah.
So what's the 2018-19 bumps about?
Yeah.
Probably cold winters.
In 14.
Yeah. We sell a lot more electricity in the winter than we do in the summer. And it's because of the electricity used as a fuel for heat. And I think that's even probably more true for Arrowhead Electric in the region than us, but for sure we peak in the wintertime. And so the colder the winter, the more electricity we're going to sell.
Before you leave that chart,
Yeah.
why are sales different than purchases? I don't get that.
That's.
I mean, do we keep some on the battery someplace?
There's two factors at play here for sure, and then maybe some others we just don't understand. The one is there's line loss. Like, we meter our purchases at the substation, we meter our sales at the end of the system. And there is some loss, some percentage of loss, just due to inefficiencies,
Mhm.
the physical transportation of power. That's somewhat predictable, and I think probably makes up most of that number. And then the other thing is the accounting isn't perfect. We know exactly how many kilowatts we paid for. We know exactly how many kilowatts we sold to our customers on our meters, but there's some other places where electricity is used where it's not metered. Some of our streetlights aren't metered. We don't meter some of our own buildings, like the power plant. We don't necessarily know exactly all the kilowatts that are being used on the system. So some of it's just unmetered.
Unmetered, so we don't, so there's no revenue, so it doesn't
Yeah.
register in the green line.
Yeah, and I show that because we do measure it. We might as well just show it on the graph. It's awfully, remarkably the same shape as the other line. So,
Right.
I mean, they correlate incredibly strongly. But you can also see that they've come closer together these past few years than they were before. And I don't know whether that's better measuring or less line loss. Couldn't tell you, but it's just a point of interest.
Yeah.
You wouldn't think line loss would decrease, right?
I wouldn't, no. Like, I don't think we've made significant changes to our system since 2007 when it comes to the distribution lines.
We put in something new. When I first came on the board, there was some equipment that went in new at the substation, or?
Yep, we've put in.
Maybe that helped.
It's possible, but I
Oh,
don't
yeah,
think so
those-
because it's not the
Yeah.
source of most of the line loss.
Unless
Every time
the-
it goes through some
Unless
sort
the
of-
old ones were,
yeah,
in their
really
failure
bad.
were causing that. But who knows?
Yeah, it's
Just a
possible.
guess.
Interesting.
So the biggest piece of our budget when it comes to electricity is our wholesale purchase of electricity from SIMPA. It's quite a bit more than half of our expenses. And so what SIMPA does with rates is a big driver of what our total expense bill is going to be. And they hadn't made a lot of changes to their rates for a while. They had a good stretch of time where they weren't making increases, and so did we. And last year, if you'll recall, they switched from a planned distribution of cash to their members, so like a dividend payment, to basically a 10% increase in what they were charging us because of some real significant market forces that were affecting their budget. So in February, we absorbed basically a 10% increase in wholesale rates and did not adjust our rates to make up for all of that. So our increase last year was 3, for this year was 3%. And inside of that 3% retail increase, we absorbed it just over 10% wholesale increase. Another big portion of our expense budget used to be our debt service payments. We had 2 bonds that we were paying, one that paid for the reconstruction of most of our distribution system in the mid-2000s, and one that paid for the construction of our power plant in 2003. Both of those bonds have been retired now this year. We don't have any more payments. And last year, or this year I should say, last year's budget for this year, that included $500,000 or $600,000 worth of debt payments that we've made. But it was more like $300,000 structurally in the budget. So that $300,000 doesn't exist in the 2024 budget anymore. The debt payments are gone. So that helps to absorb the wholesale rate increase that we saw. For 2024, SIMP is not going to change their wholesale rate increase. So when we think about how much are we going to spend on purchased power, we're looking at that, what did we imagine 2023 budget was going to be, and how have we actually performed, and then what are we projecting it's going to actually end up at, and that's the number we're throwing in for 2024. So we're imagining we're going to end up spending about $1.82 million on power in 2023, and that's the number we've included for 2024.
So when you're talking about the bond payments that are disappearing, is that, when you get to the detail, is that under 604 electric, and then there are the first lines in the
Yes.
Category 1 and Category 3?
That's right.
So it's really 500,000.
In 2023, there was a balloon payment on the second one.
Yep.
So if you look at the years prior, although it doesn't show the principal, it was closer to 200,000 and 100,000. It was about 300,000 rather than that 500,000 on an annual basis. And then you just had a big balloon payment at the last payment of that bond.
Yeah, nice to get rid of that.
So when we look at our expense, we can just keep it at a pretty high level of categories. Our personnel budget has changed pretty dramatically in the past 5 years. There's a couple reasons for that. One, we've tried to keep up on a market basis with what we need to be paying our employees, but far more significantly, we added a third line worker to the crew. So we used to have 2 full-time journeyman line workers. Now we've got 2 full-time journeyman line workers and a full-time apprentice line worker. The apprentice pay scale is not quite as high as the journeyman, but it ramps up pretty fast. So every year they're getting a lot closer to that. It's how you can see the budget's gone up. Like the big jump was 22, and that's when we absorbed that new position fully in the budget for the first time, and then it's gone up a lot, more than 10% those next couple of years, and that has to do with not just increases to structural increases to wages, but also as the apprentice becomes more qualified, we pay them more on our scale. Inside of that personnel budget is not just those 3 full-time line worker positions, but also a portion of all the administrative staff at City Hall to cover this time that we're doing right here, all the HR, all of the finance, all the back of house support that the administrative staff does for each of the departments. And then we pay for Shane too. Yeah. Supplies is a variable line item for us. And there's some just kind of typical operating supplies that we need that don't make up most of this. And then supplies for doing significant projects like thousands of feet of wire or dozens of transformers or those sorts of things are what make up the big chunk of this. And that can be really variable depending on how much work we can actually accomplish in a year with our own forces or how many projects we decide to take on with other forces. Services is the same way.
But it looks like, sorry, with supplies, it looks like we're anticipating a lot more in 2024 than in 23.
I don't think we were, I think that was probably a little low in '23. So you can see back in time, when we did the '23 budget, we knew 20 and 21, but we didn't know '22 yet. It hadn't been finished. And I think the actual '23 is probably going to come in higher than that, and we probably just aimed low at that number. And you can see it looks pretty structural now that number should be higher than 88.5. The 182 is definitely assuming we need to supply some more stuff. So we're going to buy some more AMI disconnect meters to work with our load control system. We're going to buy a number of new transformers. We've got a lot of pretty large projects that are in the works, and those transformers can cost $15,000 to $25,000 each. We're definitely going to be supplying up more wire, some more stuff like that. So yep, that number is bigger this year, and that's on purpose. We think we need to buy more stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Services includes all the typical business type services, insurance costs, utility services at our different facilities, also contracted services. And so this number can change a little bit if we think we're going to be able to hire more projects, but typically we're at capacity both from what we can manage and what contractors can provide us locally when it comes to this. So we'll typically hire a contractor to come in and bury some overhead lines for us, maybe a couple 100 feet or 1,000 feet in a year. And that's hard for us to do more than that, both with the labor that's available and just our ability to manage that type of project. We talked about purchase power already. Miscellaneous is just that. Other things that we don't categorize in these other categories. Depreciation hasn't changed a whole lot. We haven't added a lot of new assets that need to be depreciated. The next stuff that we're talking about when it comes from electric, we've talked about this last budget too, but we haven't actually gotten around to this, is talking about potentially investing in some sort of automated or motorized switch for the substation. That's probably our next big project, and we'll depreciate that and it'll change this number. Otherwise, this number should probably start just kind of going down a little bit from here on out.
But that switch isn't included in the cost of that isn't included in the 2024 budget for supplies?
No, we're not. That would definitely be capitalized, a project of that size, and so we won't put it in an expense budget. We will use our cash to pay for it and then depreciate it over the life of the asset.
Just a question, with the purchase power, so between 2022 and 2023, it jumped a couple $100,000. Was that the 10%? Is
Yeah.
that due to that 10% increase?
Yep. So we were anticipating it. We've been talking about it before it was implemented in February. We knew it was coming
Yeah.
when we adopted the 23 budget.
Okay, and so we were still seeing that, and that's why it looks about the same in
Yeah.
2024.
I think we were also assuming that 23 was going to be a little higher sales than it's going to end up being,
Yeah,
and
you probably won't spend quite that much.
we probably won't. Yeah, it'll be close, but probably not quite that much. And that could change. If it becomes incredibly cold for November and December, we might hit that number or even go above it. Nice thing about this line item in our budget is this is literally the product, right? So the more of this we buy, the more of it we sell, and since it's kind of a fixed margin, then we spread that cost out. It's just better for us to sell more electricity in terms of business case.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's cold, that's not great for our customers, but it's good for the operation of the utility. we're a little bit agnostic about it. You know, we want to create new load to sell, but we certainly don't wish for our existing customers' bills to go up in order to make our utility work better.
Paradox of the power industry,
Indeed it is.
always.
The other number here is debt service. There is some debt service in this budget, even though we're done with our electric bond payments. What's going on here?
No idea.
There was a debt that we sold in the general fund of the city to pay for the public works garage. And a portion of that bond is being covered by all the utility departments and the general fund as well. So this is the interest portion of the debt for the public works garage that we've attributed to the electric fund. It's important to know how that model works because we're probably going to be building a new city hall next year. And we're going to do the same thing. There'll be debt that we'll need to sell for this project, and a significant portion of it's going to have to get covered by the utilities because they are a significant portion of the activity that occurs in City Hall. So, good to keep in mind when we talk about what's our future debt payments going to look like in this department. And also why I'm going to actually end up recommending a rate increase.
Where in the detail, where is the power purchase? I was looking for it, I couldn't find it.
It's in the middle of page 2 called power supply. And
Oh, yeah.
it's one of the numbers that
560.
it's not, the one that we've got written in the detail is not the one we have in the budget, so don't pay attention to that one. But it shows you the actual amounts anyway from the previous years.
Right.
It shows you where we're at year to date, although it's hard to interpret what that means without really some context.
So it says 1.6 million there.
Yeah,
On
but
the
it's
actual
not.
budget, 1.8 million.
Yeah, we knew it wasn't going to be 1.6. It's just that's the number that's in there. Since we're not really using this detailed spreadsheet to create our
Overall
rate
budget, yeah.
increase decision, it's just holding most of that other information in there. But this one isn't the number I was using. So.
Okay.
Well, so we're going to add all that up, all those things that we think we're going to need, and we are at just over 3 million, which is quite a bit lower than 2023's budget. But keep in mind, there was a almost $400,000 one-time placeholder to make those extra debt payments, the extra balloon payment that we included in the 2023 budget. So you take that out, and it's a much smoother transition from the totals of the past to the number that we're expecting to see in 2024. We talked about our sales already, so we're going to switch to page 2. And this is an ongoing issue that's been out there, and I'm not sure if it's going to happen this year, but it will certainly be discussed again this year and next year, is the amount of money that the electric fund is contributing to the general fund is $40,000 plus 1.5% of our gross revenues. It equals about 2.5% of our gross revenues right now. And what's typical in the industry is closer to 5% before debt rating agencies start thinking that it's too high or that it's an issue. So that payment is just under 70 grand. And it could easily be twice that and still be typical to the industry.
So I'm lost here. What's so we're on page 2, and you're talking about this first paragraph.
Yeah.
Right? And where like so I don't get.
Let's back up then.
Yeah, please.
The city has an ordinance that says if anyone wants to operate an electric utility in the city limits of Grand Marais, they need to have a franchise with the city.
In other words, kind of like a annual licensing fee
Yeah.
or something.
And that franchise fee is $40,000 plus 1.5% of your gross sales. And That's what it's been for a very long time, that formula.
Mm-hmm.
And when, Simpa, you've seen some of their budget work that they do and the analysis that they provide. And the other thing that they do is look at the different factors that a bonding agency, the bond rating agency, looks at to evaluate the financial stability, performance, future outlook of a utility.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is, what's this percentage? What percentage of the amount of the electric utilities revenues are being paid to a government entity, either as a franchise fee or a license fee or a payment in lieu of taxes? There's a lot of different ways that this happens, but it always does happen. And so they're measuring what's that percentage.
And they from the sort of insurer's point of view, or where would be the bond rating people, they want that in order to be very low, right?
They do. They want, if it's high, it could potentially threaten the ability to pay back debt. That's always the perspective of a bond rating agency, is how do we make sure there's always ample revenues to pay back this debt? The
Yeah.
more cash on hand, the more days operating cash, the more cash to debt ratio.
Yep.
Those are the types of factors that they're looking at. And this is one of the factors that they look at, just because it's a typical thing that all utilities have. And
Mm-hmm.
we're not even moving their needle, is with my point. Like, it's not like they say, oh, you're A+, if you were at 5, you'd be C. We could go to 5 and still not have affected their opinion of us at all.
Yeah. So what's going on with city council? How come all of a sudden they're getting all
It's not
greedy?
how come all of a sudden. It's been an ongoing, like, we always mention this every year when the city talks about its budget, is as we need more revenues, and we look at all of our sources to make that happen. This is one of them. And from a city's perspective, like, this is just another operation that is revenue generating that could potentially contribute to the city's well-being, like the liquor store or the campground or something else. And we don't take profits from the electric fund and put them in the general fund in some way that would motivate us to be profit-oriented, like we are at the liquor store or at the campground. We still only make our decisions here from a utility perspective, but that doesn't mean we wouldn't look at this and say, would it be appropriate to take a little more of this for the general fund?
Yeah. So, I mean, the net effect is rates go up. I mean, it's really, this is, in a certain sense, it's, taking money out of one pocket but sticking it in the other, right?
It's always that way, so
Yeah.
yes, that's exactly what it is.
And say this went up to, I don't know, 10% or something, so suddenly now we have a big hole in the budget, and we make that up by increasing revenues, right? By increasing rates.
Rates, sure.
Yeah. So the net effect of this is the city is asking for a little more contribution for its general operating fund from the electrical rate payer, the electrical subscribers, electricity purchasers.
And proportionate to their use of that utility.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's exactly what it is, yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
So the final note on that is, when we did a rate study in 2020, we assumed that that amount was going to change. So that, nobody's made that decision yet, but it seemed a safe assumption to see that happen. So when we looked at our future rates, we imagined that would be in place.
And that should be listed as an expense somewhere? I mean, that's...
Yes.
And where does that show up as an expense?
On page 4, the fourth line down.
Franchise fee, yeah. Mhm.
So are you saying you're anticipating the city council doing that for this upcoming budget year? Or would that take effect in 2025, or?
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
And we don't have it built into the budget I'm proposing to you, but it's just been an ongoing discussion, and I think you just need to be aware that it's ongoing.
Well, for the purposes of discussion, I'll move staff recommendation that we increase the fee by 2% for 2024. It says in your recommendation for 2023, but you meant 2024?
I did.
Yeah.
In 2023, for 2024.
Yeah.
We didn't really talk much about the various categories under revenue, right?
Not
No,
to-
I'll just wait until you're done with your motion.
Yeah, not to
Continue.
call on Roberts here, but there's a motion on the table.
Yeah, no, we have a motion on the table by Bill to recommending a 2% raise increase for 2024. So now we can have discussion.
We need a second.
Is there a second for this?
Sure, I'll second. But I mean, it seems
Second by
like
Charles, now we can have discussion.
we would want to talk about
I hope so.
revenues before we talk about rate increase, right?
Right.
So,
It's the strange world of Robert's rules where you're really not supposed to have any discussion before a motion is made, which makes absolutely no sense to me. And so I don't see that happen terribly often. We'll call this the hybrid approach. How much is a 2% increase?
Okay, that's it.
About $54,000 is what I think it is.
Okay.
And that's based on, again, if you look at our 23, assumption was we were going to collect about $2.75 million this in 2023. And based on our first 3 quarters, I've downgraded that estimate to 2,725. So that's what I've moved over into the 2024 budget. We actually thought we were going to make more than 2,750 because we also had a rate increase of 3% in 2023. So we were going to make more like $100,000 more than 2,725 is what we thought we were going to make, and I don't think that's going to happen. So that's again a factor of just slightly lower sales in 23 than we had in 22. We have some other sources of income that are worth remembering. We have some miscellaneous income. The majority of that now is actually interest on our deposits, which is new. It's been a long time since we've actually seen that be a measurable amount, but it is again
that's miscellaneous?
in miscellaneous revenue. The other thing is that we just get occasional payments from people that aren't SIMPA for things, whether it's a grant for something or some kind of random aid payment from a government agency, and it ends up living in here. But this 35 is mostly, we think we're going to sell a little bit of wire to some outside vendors, and we think we're going to make some interest money on our deposits, and that's most of this.
We're in the wire sales business?
We sell miscellaneous materials to a lot of folks.
Just
You
stuff
know,
on hand that we don't need? Is that the
No,
idea?
it's for our purposes, but if we're doing an extension to a customer that's only serving that customer, like it's just like in the water and sewer, they need to pay for that
I see.
extension. No, there's no other customer that's benefiting from it, and so we charge them for it, and we'll sell them or their contractor or send them an invoice for the materials, but we don't expect other people to stock this sort of material.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're in the wire sale business
see.
a little bit.
But it's really recovering our costs?
Yeah.
Yeah.
SIMPA has we have a contract with them for the capacity of our power plant that pays us $216,000 a year, that SIMPA uses that capacity to meet their capacity needs. The electric industry, from SIMPA's perspective, they have 2 things they need to be able to do. They need to be able to put enough kilowatt hours of energy into the grid to account for the kilowatt hours of energy that we take off of it. So the energy side is one thing, but the capacity is the other thing. Our load hits a certain number, and we have to have enough generation capacity to match that load number. And so we have to account for both. They don't operate our power plant very often. It's not really used to produce energy for their needs for the market, but they definitely use that 6 megawatts of capacity to meet our capacity requirements. As we've been transitioning into more and more solar and wind, this is even more important, because as we learn more about the real capacity from solar and wind, the industry downgrades the amount of the percentage you can use. So if you build 100 megawatts of wind, you don't get to use 100 megawatts of capacity. It's really only 20 megawatts of capacity based on its actual typical operation. So when they need to be able to bump up that number, the wind's not blowing, but there's a lot of folks using power, we need to be able to turn to switchable sources. And these member generation units make up a small but important percentage of their fleet, and they think they probably need more in the future. As a matter of fact, the question is open right now: do any of us want more member generation? I've assumed the answer is no, for two reasons. One, we probably don't want more diesel power plants, just because we're not interested in the technology. And that I don't think SIMPA wants to spend money on putting battery storage in Grand Marais as a quick start unit yet, although I think that might be coming. And I'm hoping that when we have this conversation, it'll be about that, not more diesel power units, but some kind of battery storage. And then two, 6 megawatts is what we have, and that's actually enough to cover our entire load, even in the coldest day of the winter. And in order for us to build more and have them be able to access that as capacity, they'd have to go back onto the transmission lines and study and see what kind of capacity they have. And we may not be able to put more than 6 megawatts back into the grid. So the rest of it's being used. So that's probably going to stay where it is. The good news is we're done paying for the power plant. This used to be the amount of money that kind of covered our bond payment for the power plant. Now we're free and clear, and we're using it for other sources, including if we want to reinvest in more capacity like battery storage or renewables or something like that. And the other good news is SIMPA is definitely interested in continuing this relationship, which is nice, because that wasn't a sure thing in 2003 when we built it. It's a 20-year contract. As a matter of fact, our term's coming up. And this next year, we're going to have to figure out, what does the renegotiated contract look like? They're not offering less price. I assume we'll be offered the same price, and it'll just be a conversation about what's the term of this deal going to be. But we shall see.
The price is based on, is it 6 megawatts times market price or something? I doubt it, right?
It's not a market price, like what they could buy energy for, or capacity for. They can buy capacity for cheaper most of the time than what they're buying here, but this is a different kind of security. Like they don't have to go on the market. It just exists. It's part of our fleet. It's something that just is a more meaningful asset to them than having to search and buy those capacities somewhere else. And plus, it's us, members, that own it. And so
It's a sure thing.
yeah, and we're paying ourselves for it. So that's a good thing. We're just going to assume that stays in the budget for a while. There's a new line item here that we didn't have before, solar/EV. We didn't have it in the 23 budget. We didn't have it in the 22 budget, but we do have it identifiable in the 22 actuals, and so we'll have it in the 23 actuals as well. We're getting revenue for our solar production and for our EV sales, and it's enough, I think, now that it merits measurement and reporting like this, so I built it in. It's not a huge number of our budget, but there it is.
How does that work? So you get revenue from your solar production because basically the city's selling energy back to
To Simpa,
Simpa.
that's right.
And that's from the city's installations?
Yeah.
Not from residential installations?
Not from residential installations, no, this is just from our installations on the Public Works garage.
Yeah.
And the golf course. right?
Well, we're not actually selling that to Simpa because it's not in the city.
Oh,
Oh,
So
doesn't it belong to you?
we own the panels. That deal is with GRE and Arrowhead Electric.
Oh.
so we sell them power?
We sell them power, but we use a lot more than we sell them, so.
Oh, I see.
But we don't put that in the electric fund, that's
Yeah.
in the golf fund.
I understand.
Last year's budget, or this year's budget, we planned on a one-time fund balance use to make up for that balloon payment and the debt, so we didn't have to jump the rates for 1 year. And then you can see that rate increase. So at a 2% rate increase, if our sales are flat and all these other things come to pass, we'll be at $3,042,000 with an assumed $3,012,000 expense budget. We actually only need about a 1% rate increase to hit that $3,012,000 target. So this is a slightly conservative rate increase. To me, it's almost like if we're going to bother with a rate increase, we might as well make it 2. We certainly have enough years where we've made it 0. That would be my secondary recommendation. If you didn't want to do 2, is let's do 0. And that means we're planning on losing about 25 grand next year.
Well, it's always nice to have a little buffer and then go to 0 next year if we need to. If
Yeah,
that makes sense.
I think we've got enough of a demonstrated history, that's how we behave, that hopefully our customers can feel some assurance that that's exactly what we'll do, is if it turns out we had a good year, then we won't need it to do a rate increase. And, back to the original paragraph, we went through a number of years with no change. 2018 through 2022, we didn't do any rate changes. So we're certainly willing to continue that if that's what's called for. The last little analysis in the expense budget are these 2 items that aren't actually invoices where we're writing a check, depreciation and debt service. They make up $265,000. So we're planning on collecting in rates $265,000 to balance that expense side of the budget, but what are we actually doing with that amount? We're only spending 113 of it on actual debt payments. This is our share of the Public Works garage debt in the electric fund, is this 112,893. So this budget assumes the rest of that money is just going to accumulate in the electric fund balance. So why would we do a rate increase of $50,000 when we know that we've got $150,000 that we're planning on putting in to the fund balance? The answer is because when we did our rate study in 2020, the recommendation by the consultant at that time was we really ought to spend some years increasing our fund balance. That a higher fund balance for this type of operation in the electric industry is more typical and standard. And so this is purposeful. We're trying to increase our fund balance. And the rate increase will contribute to that.
And what is our fund balance? I mean,
I
what's
suppose
the
you didn't
number?
get the balance sheet in the details.
I don't think we did.
It's a 7-digit number, so, but I don't want to off the cuff tell you what it is. Let me come back and give you some better information on that.
Okay. But that's the fund balance that showed up, I can't remember where that was. We get revenue off of that because we're getting interest.
We do gain interest off of it, that's right.
That was under the miscellaneous category, I think.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so we don't need to accumulate a fund balance to save up for projects necessarily in this, at least not significant major ones that we've got planned, because we don't have any, other than the potentially motorized switch in the substation, we don't have any significant major capital projects planned. But that doesn't mean we don't think we're going to spend a heck of a lot of money on capital projects. We just don't have them identified and planned. We know that every year we reinvest in our distribution system. We bury some overhead lines that are difficult to access. We extend some overhead or some lines for new customers. We add some capacity in our existing system. We make transformers get bigger to account for new customers that are connecting to them. We make improvements in the substation when equipment gets old and fails, and we make repairs in the power plant. It's a 20-year-old diesel engines. Although they only have very limited hours of operation for 20-year-old things, it's still a 20-year-old thing. Seals are going to get older. Everything needs to be maintained and occasionally repaired. And when we make those repairs, it's a big amount of money. $50,000 to $500,000 is a typical kind of this thing occurs whether you plan for it or not expense in the power plant.
So the money's sitting there to cover maintenance and improvements, capital expenditure, larger capital expenditures.
Yeah. And unanticipated necessary expenses. So when we're talking about a $3 million a year operation, having that much set aside in a fund balance, it might be much, that's closer to what our rate expert would recommend that we do.
Yeah.
I mentioned the City Hall project before.
Yeah.
We don't have a number yet of what we think it's going to cost us, although we're very close to that. We've got some budget numbers we're looking at that we want to have really tied up pretty well by the end of this year. At the end of November, the City Council is going to talk about this project with our financial advisors and look at some debt scenarios. So we'll soon have better numbers. The Public Works bond was, I don't think quite $3 million that we ended up borrowing. Maybe closer to $4 million. Either way, there's only a percentage of it that we're charging to the electric fund. The City Hall project is going to be $8.5 million, and $4.5 million of that might be the City Hall side of it, rather than the liquor store side, or even $5 million. So it's a much bigger potential number, and the percentage, but the percentage is probably pretty close to the same of what we would say the electric fund ought to pay for. If we think that half of what's going on at City Hall is actually utility business, that's probably pretty close. And then most of that utility business is electric rather than water or sewer. So half again. It's at least 25%, maybe as much as a third of the activity that's going on at City Hall we could attribute to the electric fund. And so we might look at the electric fund having to pick up then a third of a debt payment of $4.5 million or $4 million. It's probably more than this number. We've got some options. We already intend to pay some cash, maybe as much as $2.5 million towards that $8.5 million project is cash that's coming from the liquor fund and the general fund. We could also put utility cash, although only electric cash, because the other two funds don't have it, and probably not very much, because we've already decided we need to accumulate this fund balance. But when we do our analysis of how much do we want to borrow, that's one of the things we're going to be looking at is, does it make more sense to put a little more cash in from the electric fund? Does that help the electric fund's future performance more? Or would it help us more to take on a higher debt payment and hold on to that cash? So that question's going to sit out there.
But some money for the City Hall project will come from the electric fund.
Yes.
Some money.
Some money.
Amount undetermined.
If we look at existing budget, 2024's existing budget has $265,000 that we can put towards debt payments that's coming in as depreciation or the debt service number. And imagine that the payment that the electric fund takes on for the City Hall is going to be 50% larger than the Public Works garage. Then we don't have to change rates at all to just absorb that payment. It just fits right in. We wanted, though, to increase our fund balance over time. And so I'm not saying we're not going to make rate increases to take on that debt payment, we still might need to.
The public works garage, that 112, 113,000, that's the sum of the debt, or that's the annual payment?
That is the share of the annual payment that we attribute to the electric fund. Yeah, I think it was maybe just over 3 million that we borrowed. So a lot of moving parts in this one. Lots of significant changes in expenses and revenues, and yet we're still kind of maintaining an even keel here.
Yeah, well, I don't think that 2% seems unreasonable. And as I said, it seems like it's nice to have a little bit of a cushion rather than be it's operating right on the edge.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Do we have a vote? All in favor of the 2% rate increase for 2024?
Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Motion carries.
As I indicated before, right before the meeting, water and sewer are next. Because our superintendent's brand new and our staff is new in those departments, it's just taking a little more time to go through it. In particular, that we just kind of changed how we do some things, and we need to make sure we understand whether those are one-time expenses or structural changes, I think, before we can make any recommendations. But we hope to be back next month with those budgets.
And that's one for water, one for sewer. It's not
One for water, one
combined.
for sewer.
Yeah.
But doesn't the water usage affect the sewer?
Yeah, we only meter the water usage.
Right.
We just account for the
Sewer is a
expenses
multiplication of the water.
Water flows downhill.
Okay. Well, if there's no other questions or discussion, that completes our meeting.
Yeah. Thanks for the nice, thorough explanation. Appreciate it.
$3 million in 1 hour.
Amazing. Motion to adjourn?
Yep. Motion made to adjourn. All in favor? Aye.
Support?
All right.